Hi everyone. Sorry, in the car on the way to a party. See, in real estate, you'll be doing a lot of these things as long as there's no other real estate agents there. You'll be attending everyone. In the meantime, I am going to go through contracts, just a basic understanding of contracts and how it works. Remember, this is contract law. I'm not going to be teaching contracts like, a sales contract or anything of that nature. That happens after you get your real estate license. To begin with, you just need to understand the basic of how contracts work. Like, number one, a contract is a meeting of the minds. It always starts off as an offer. Now, don't be like me when I first got my license. Craziness. I remember getting all excited. I had my first offer to present, and I called up the listing agent, and I'm like, I have a contract for you. Where would you like me to send it? And he said, silly newbie, it's not a contract. It's an offer. Yeah, I learned the hard way there. So make sure that you don't do that same thing. Make sure that you understand it's just an offer until both sides sign. If you do not have two people's signature, or I should say all parties' signatures, because there may be more than one person, you can always check the tax record to see how many owners there are. But if you don't get both sides' signatures, then you unfortunately do not have a contract. And that could be a problem. So just remember, verbal does not work in real estate. Again, lessons I've learned the hard way that I'm hoping that you don't ever listen to verbal promises. They must all be in writing, no matter what. Even great agents have gone down this road. I have agents in my office myself, and I've had to go through this many times with, okay, so we talked about this. Why is it not in writing? Well, she said, or he said. I'm like, yeah, again, that doesn't work, because what's going to happen on settlement day when you show up and the roof didn't get repaired? You never had it in writing. I'm sorry. What? I never said that. These are the type of things that happen all the time. So make sure you get it in writing. All right, so let's just talk about the basic meeting of the minds. And that means all parties have agreed. So what ends up happening is it starts off with an offer. I'm making an offer to buy your home for $200,000. So $200,000 is my offer to you, Mr. Seller. Now, don't get me wrong. A seller could throw out an offer as well, as has happened occasionally. Not very often, but it does occasionally happen. So with that, typically it's the buyer who throws out the offer. I'd like to buy your home for $200,000. At this point, we've now submitted an offer, okay? A couple things could happen. Number one, the buyer at any time prior to acceptance can withdraw that offer. You will have some clients in your life, you'll go through this experience at least once, where you have a buyer who, I call them their commitment phobes. You can call it buyer's remorse, cold feet, whatever you would like to call it. And sometimes, legitimately there's a good reason, but they discovered something about the property that they just don't like. Other times, you'll find that they do this with every property that they come across for some reason. They just have a hard time making decisions. So, with that in mind, they have the right to withdraw any offer prior to acceptance. So, if you're representing a seller, don't forget that, because if you drag your feet to accept the offer, buyer may walk away. So don't forget that. So that could work in your favor or it could work against you, but always keep it in mind. Withdraw the offer. The second thing that could happen would be that the seller counter offers, and this does happen a lot, where $200,000, no, I'm not interested in $200,000, more like $215,000. Okay, so now here's the way it works. Once you submit a counter offer, you've technically killed the original offer and created a brand new one. Now, this is very important, because imagine the scenario. You're working with a buyer and you go to submit an offer on 123 Main Street, and they counter you. Maybe you offer $200,000 once again, and the seller counters $225,000, and your buyers say, that's crazy. Why? We wouldn't take that. So at this point, you move on and you start looking at other houses. And let's just say your buyer finds another house and submits another offer for $200,000 on another piece of property. And guess what? This seller accepts. Now, meanwhile, 123 Main Street is, because this is what happens all the time, the sellers get a little nervous because you haven't responded to them. So you could tell them that your buyer's not interested, or you could just not tell them, because my experience is best kind of to leave it open a little bit. I don't like to burn bridges, because you never know, your buyer may turn around and want that property in the end. I've had that happen to me too many times. So I decide to always kind of leave the door open a little bit. So with that in mind, your buyer has now been committed to another property, right? We have a ratified contract, and they're excited. Suddenly, the sellers for 123 Main Street are a little bit nervous because you haven't responded to them, and they say, you know what, maybe that was a bad move. Maybe we shouldn't have countered. Let's just go ahead and sign their original $200,000 offer. So next thing you know, you're getting in your email box another ratified contract. Okay, well, we decided to ratify the contract. What happens? Is your buyer now committed to buy 2 homes? Hope not, right? Well, this is the reason why contract law is very, very important. Once the seller crossed off that $200,000 and wrote the new offer in, countered it, they killed the initial offer. The only one who can resurrect it would be the original buyer. So the buyer who submitted the offer, the one who submitted the offer to begin with, okay? So this is very, very important to understand. So if you're submitting an offer and your seller counters the offer, they've initially killed the first one and they cannot bring it back to the dead. Now you could bring it back from the dead, sorry. So you could call that buyer up and say, buyer, look, my sellers have had a change of heart. Do you want to resubmit the original offer and we'll go ahead and accept it this time? But you just can't pull up your email box and accept it. It's just, it doesn't work that way. So remember, with a counter offer, kills the initial offer. Very, very important to understand. So once you've killed the initial offer, you can't bring it back unless you're the original, you were the one who created the offer. After that, also, the next thing that could happen would be rejection. So we've had this happen quite a few times as well. Not a great scenario to be in, to be honest with you. I always try to avoid this as much as possible, but it does occasionally happen where your seller says, I don't want to work with these. One of my very first listings, guys, it was not very long after I got my license. I really didn't know how to handle it, and unfortunately I didn't have good guidance. Bad choice on my part, but I didn't know any better, and that's why I'm here, to kind of help guide you, not to make the mistakes I did. So with that in mind, I had a seller who wanted me to do an open house. And this was in the early 2000s. So I did an open house on her house, and it happened to be a beautiful spring day. And she happened to be there doing a yard sale. She wanted to do the yard sale in the front yard. And for some reason, me as a real estate agent being new, didn't really know to say, hey, that's not a good idea. But instead, that's what she did. She had her yard sale. The windows were all open. In comes a buyer. Now, this buyer says to me, I really like this house, but I'm just going to tell you, this needs to be replaced, that needs to be replaced, look at the crack in the ceiling, oh, the paint job's not the greatest. Some buyers think it's a good strategy to criticize the house so that the seller will come down. I promise you guys that is never, ever, ever a good strategy. Don't try that, okay? It doesn't work. Nobody likes it when you tell them their house sucks. In fact, they're emotionally attached to their house. They love their house. The only way they're going to accept your offer, again, it pays to consult a realtor, or a professional, I should say, at anything, would be to say, I love your house, Mrs. Seller, and I want to take good care of it. Unfortunately, you have these buyers out there who think they're really smart, and they try this negotiation tactic like it's a Macy's shirt or something. You can go to a department store and complain about a stain on a shirt, and they'll give you a discount. Doesn't work that way with houses, okay? People are emotionally attached to these houses. So the seller, in my particular situation, unfortunately, was like, heard everything because the windows were all open. She was having a yard sale, and she was like, I don't really care. As soon as that lady walked out the door, she said, I don't care what she offers me. She can offer me $1 million. I would never sell to her. Bad situation, guys. Bad situation to be in. So thankfully I got like 3 other offers the same day, so it didn't really matter. But if it would have been a slower market, I may have had a problem with that. So we have to be very, very careful, because sellers, remember when we talked about fair housing in my fair housing module, remember, if you don't accept someone's offer, you better have a valid reason, and it can't be for emotional reasons, because if you do that, you could find yourself in a fair housing type of situation. So this is really important that you understand. So rejection should be handled carefully. In fact, in my personal opinion, you should never, ever reject anything. You should always counter. Unless, of course, you have multiple offers, then that's the exception to the rule. You're allowed to reject one because you got several others. All right, anyway, so rejection is an opportunity for the seller, and you need to let your buyers know that the seller could always reject their offer. We've also had a lot of times where people have offered low, and the sellers say, "I don't even want to work with them because they've insulted me." Never mind that it's a business transaction. They've insulted me. My house is worth so much more than that. So, with that in mind, just be careful and prepare your buyer that you could have a rejection. Now, some contracts maybe in the world may have built-in time frames. Ours do not in Virginia, the ones that we work with, we'd have to add. So for example, another way for a contract to die would be if it's gone past its time frame. So for example, your buyer decides to submit an offer on a property, but they're like, look, I have to know by tomorrow. If I don't know by tomorrow, I don't want to buy the house anymore because I'm just really in a rush. So you could do that where you put in a time frame and you could say offer expires 6/30, 2014 at midnight. Okay, you could write that in. Now some contracts, again, nationally may have those built in. Ours do not, and if yours does not, then you would have to add that. Whether or not that's a good strategy, you would need to talk to your broker. I personally don't believe in it, but there's some situations where I understand where it's necessary. So anyway, lapse of time could terminate a contract. Also, believe it or not, death or insanity. Yes, people do go insane prior to acceptance. So death of either party before acceptance, obviously because we're talking about an offer, would terminate the offer because the person has already died. However, you need to understand that it does not terminate a contract. Even if you die, you must buy. Even if you die, you must sell. That's how it works, because once you've already made your commitment, you're committed, and your estate must follow through. But as an offer, death does terminate the offer. So if your buyer makes an offer and then dies suddenly, then the offer is void. Okay, that's very, very important. And insanity. Yes, people do go insane. So that would also terminate an offer. Very, very important. Of course, the last one is the most, the one that we always hope for. It's acceptance. So once it's been accepted, that means all terms have been agreed on by both parties. We call that ratification. So your contract is now ratified. So once you have a ratified contract, there's a meeting of the minds, and now we have a legally binding instrument. So your contract could be accepted a few different ways. Again, it depends on what type of contract. Because remember, this is just contracts overall. It's not necessarily sales contract law. It's just contract law. Some types of contracts can be accepted orally. Some require in writing. It depends on what your sales contract says. If it says it's allowed to be accepted orally, great. But it's not going to be valid, or I should say enforceable, unfortunately, in court unless it's in writing. So I want to talk to you about the statute of frauds. So statute of frauds says must be in writing. Any contract for over 1 year in term must be in writing, and that would apply to sales contracts. Now, short-term leases could legally be enforced even if they're oral. However, it's just not a wise thing to do. You really should never have any type of contract that's not in writing. But again, it could be accepted even if the person just calls you up and says it's accepted. Now, hopefully your broker will explain more on that, because we have some golden rules in our office of what, how procedures, standard of practice of how you should handle those type of things. There's also another rule, because once upon a time, believe it or not, when I first got into real estate, we didn't have email attachments. We did have email, but we didn't have email attachments. And honestly, email was not commonly used. I know it sounds crazy now, but back then, that's just not what happened. So before my time, there wasn't even fax machines. So what happened was people had to mail contracts or physically drive contracts places. This is how it was. So this is actually a rule. A mailbox rule has never changed, and it is still effective. You could still use it. So for example, let's just say I have a full price cash offer. Oh, I love those. No contingencies. Oh, I love it even more. And let's just say that I submit it to my seller. However, maybe my seller has taken it their sweet time, or maybe I have a ratified contract in my hand and I just haven't delivered it. Hopefully I have. But the mailbox rule is, if a buyer's agent calls me and says, oh, so sorry, my buyer would like to withdraw their offer, I could say, oh, I'm so sorry, I've already stuck it in the mail. So as long as I have a postmark that says that date, I would have no problems at all, disputing it legally. So if they have contingencies, it really doesn't apply because they can use one of their contingencies to get out. And I always say if they really want to change their mind, you should just let them go. However, from a seller's point of view, if you got a full price cash offer, I mean, really, they have no excuse. They're going to buy, and you can use the mailbox rule. So don't forget about that one. And you know what's great? You should always ask all the agents you know about the mailbox rule and see how many of them know about it. But you do. So that's the ace in your pocket, okay? So another requirement for a sales contract. So you have to have an offer and you have to have an acceptance. The next requirement for a sales contract is consideration. Now, all I want you to think about with consideration, is that it means money. So if you have an offer and an acceptance and you have money, there's one more requirement, and that would be the lack of any defenses. And I should say two more. Statute of frauds, remember, must be in writing. And then there must be a lack of any defenses, and I'm going to go through all of that with you. But in the meantime, I want you to think about consideration. Consideration is just money. If you think of it that way, you'll be fine. Okay, so that's why gift contracts are not enforceable, because there is no consideration. So remember, gift promises, gift contracts are not enforceable because there is no consideration. And that brings us over to defenses. So with defenses, there's lots of different types of defenses that one could claim. And if there's a defense, then it leaves your contract either void or voidable. So if it leaves it void, that means that it never existed to begin with. So certain people, certain situations, it's impossible to actually create a contract. So it was void from the beginning. Others, and majority of them, will leave your contract in a voidable state, which means that one side can void the contract at any time. I call those open doors. So at any time they can walk out. So it's something for you to pay very close attention to and to be aware of. And in my next section, I'm going to talk about what could leave your contract in a voidable state. All right, thanks, guys.